This episode of Branding the Beltway is brought to you by Piper Strategies and Orange Slices. Piper Strategies, marketing that moves the needle. Piper Strategies is a full-service creative agency for leaders serious about growth. We decode the complex, translating mission-driven work into clear, compelling narratives. Our clients expand their reach, communicate with impact, and earn trust in competitive markets so they can win more work. We don't just deliver results, we build your internal marketing muscle. With Piper Strategies, clients grow with us until they outgrow us. It's a partnership-first, unagency approach that not only gets you noticed and builds credibility, but also scales your brand and your team. Learn more at piperstrategies.com. Orange Slices, fresh intelligence for B2G success. Cut through the noise with Orange Slices, a trusted source for public sector insights, teaming opportunities, and procurement intel. With a playful name and a powerful platform, they're serious about making data accessible and usable so the entire GovCon community can thrive. For resources, visit orangeslices.ai. Hi, and welcome to this month's episode of Branding the Beltway. I'm your host, Stacey Piper, and today we have with us Kelly Lokshin. We're going to be talking about marketing in the shadows, how to build brand authority in the intelligence community. Kelly is the Director of Marketing at Rhombus Power, Inc. Rhombus Power uses AI to turn complex multi-domain data into real-time decision advantage for government leaders. Welcome, Kelly. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Stacey, so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be here, and I really appreciate you extending the invitation. And hopefully, this conversation is a really interesting one for not just us, but for everyone who's listening. So yeah, a little bit about myself. As you said, Director of Marketing at Rhombus Power. We are a Silicon Valley-based company. Building out AI-powered predictive intelligence and decision support solutions for national security and defense customers. I, as Director of Marketing at a still fairly small company, I'm able to wear a lot of different hats in this role. So touching field marketing, product marketing, PR and executive comms, but then also do a fair amount of external engagement myself, some of that early sort of top of funnel BD touch points with potential customers and advisors and other folks in the ecosystem. I didn't grow up in the marketing community though. I actually began my career in government. I was in DC. I started off at the Department of Justice supporting investigations at the Inspector General's office. And then from there transitioned into the Defense Intelligence Agency where I was an all-source analyst. And it was really, those experiences that one made me fall in love with the mission of, national security and in the intelligence world, but also kind of sparked my initial interest in how can different technologies be leveraged to empower users and analysts and decision makers across the national security space to make better, faster, more informed decisions for some of these crises that we face today. So between my time at DIA and my current role at Rhombus, I was doing sales and marketing at another startup, and that was an incredible opportunity to really cut my teeth on the functions themselves, and was able to use the domain expertise that I had from the intelligence community world, the sales and marketing experience that I built in my previous career my previous role rather, in this role at Rhombus today. And it's been about 2 years at Rhombus, and it's been a lot of fun. Every day is different. Every day is something new, very, very dynamic, which is great for a person like me.
That's great. Wow. And what a rich background. I think since we first talked, I forgot about your stint in government. And I think that gives you a unique position to the sensitivities that marketers can encounter when trying to market to the IC. So often as a marketer, I'm always like telling clients we need to talk about our customer success stories and try to leverage testimonials and references and things like that. And beyond the official CPARs, sometimes that's hard when you have, clients with 3-letter acronyms and things like that don't want the work that you're doing to be disclosed. And for that reason, I know that many CXOs are of the mindset that intelligence customers are solely relationship driven and can't really be influenced by traditional marketing. I'm wondering if, in your experience, have you seen opportunities where marketing can actually shape the market perception and positioning and add strategic value?
Definitely. I think really marketing and the relationships reinforce one another. So because marketing, the work that we're able to do is to create that context, create that awareness, build that credibility ahead of any of those discussions. So when your CEO is getting introduced to somebody or your salesperson is engaging in that conversation with a potential customer, it's not the first time that they're hearing of your company. You've been able to, through, whether it's engaging at different industry events, podcasts, think tanks and other more trade specific journals, attending roundtables, but then also your traditional building a great website, having a social media sort of digital presence of some sort. It allows that credibility and awareness to be built so that when those conversations are happening, the first 30 minutes aren't being spent on just having to explain exactly who you are, what you do, but rather you're already kind of a name and you're linked to that specific customer's mission in their mind ahead of those conversations. And then I do think that marketing also, depending on sort of where you sit within your marketing organization, has an opportunity to create a lot of those opportunities for further engagement and further relationship building. So going to those industry events, hosting events yourself, creating those opportunities for either new contacts or existing contacts, those relationships to deepen, is also something that marketing can take on in addition to some of the more traditional sort of campaigns and collateral and slicks and all of that good stuff.
I love that. And I love this whole concept that, all of the marketing touches can reinforce the relationships that are built in person. And
Mm-hmm.
on the flip side, the marketing touch points can actually make it easier to have someone from your company introduce themselves or the brand name be recognizable, which gives a level of, credibility so that government employee, government decision maker would actually be willing to speak to you when they see you in person.
Definitely. I think if you have a meeting with a potential customer or any sort of initial touch point, and it's the first time that they're hearing about your company, that probably means that marketing isn't moving, sort of left of engagement as much as they're able to. And how can you, get your name, get your brand, get your capabilities into the hearts and minds and thoughts of those senior decision makers that you're going to be having those conversations with, in ways that maybe are a little bit less traditional, but it does help to have people who are, based in the Beltway, based in DC, close to the customers, who understand where are these people going, what kind of engagements and roundtables and sort of trade shows are they attending? What kind of media are they consuming? Is there a specific trade journal that people within the intelligence community are reading that maybe unless you didn't have somebody who had that insight, they wouldn't ever know that maybe it's worth, getting an ad or even publishing a thought piece and thought leadership piece there. So it takes a little bit more creativity, but it definitely pays off because especially intelligence professionals, they're taught just by nature to be a little bit more skeptical, a little bit, have a lot of questions and want to understand what that authority and credibility is. So the fact that they may have already heard about you from other colleagues from different organizations, and have already heard great things about your capabilities, or at least at minimum, the name itself rings a bell. That makes every other conversation from the sales perspective much easier, more seamless. And then, government conversations are long, but can help expedite it as much as possible.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, right. Like marketing's job is making it easier for sales to sell. So I love that kind of, I don't know, like air cover
Mm-hmm.
for all of the people out there that are client facing or doing business development. Now is a really challenging time in GovCon, and what we're seeing is a lot of government contractors that maybe didn't previously sell to the IC or even defense agencies shifting their strategies from focusing on civilian to focusing on some of those agencies that are getting more of the funding right now. And so if you were talking to your leadership team about expanding into intelligence markets, what organizational decisions related to growth in marketing do you think matters most?
That's a great question. And I think this is not just true for this specific example, but I think is beneficial for a lot of different organizations, no matter who you're selling to, is not having marketing siloed off, making it a really integrated cross-functional collaborator with the rest of the company, because being close to the customer, the post-sales or client success customer delivery piece, understanding what the customer feedback is, starting to adopt what their language is and how the different capabilities that you're introducing are actually impacting the mission. That helps inform, marketing efforts and language and content and the rest. It's also helpful to be close to the sales folks and the BD people, understanding what their priorities are, who they're engaging with, what their thoughts and strategies are the best way to get in front of those people. But then even on the technical side and understanding from a product perspective, what new features are being developed based on customer feedback. What capabilities are they refining based on, certain market segments that the team is trying to target. So having that really integrated marketing person or team, and not having them just be kind of like an afterthought that you just send something to after the fact and say, hey, can you make this look pretty? I think is a really, really important piece to be able to communicate to the customer, really be able to, at the end of the day, sell the product to the customer in a way that resonates with them, what they're actually experiencing, what the technology capabilities actually are, in a way that, unless you're kind of having that continuous cross-functional collaboration, it's just really, really hard to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, you're right. The keeping marketing involved, at the highest levels and
Mm-hmm.
not having it be the lipstick on a pig at the end, uh, is going to be so important for any organization, approaching any agency or market. But um, I wanted to know, I know your background was really kind of meant for marketing to the IC, but if someone was making a new hire, what level of like mission understanding or clearance requirements do you think are needed in the marketing and growth space when you're selling to this audience?
Yeah, I don't personally think that like clearance requirements are really a necessity. I, from my previous roles, do have a clearance, but not leveraging it as much now as obviously I was when I was in government. I do think that mission understanding is very, very helpful. Um, it not only allows you to understand really what the objective of your customer is, but also the dynamics of, the different interagency dynamics, what those different acronyms stand for. And I think if you're hiring somebody who doesn't have maybe that same context of the intelligence or national security community, having them side saddle customer conversations with the BD folks to really, as quickly as possible, get spun up on kind of like the so what of what we're delivering is really, really valuable to do early on, because then, assuming that they're bringing the marketing skills that maybe they have built elsewhere in a different market, they're able to couple those up in a way that probably creates a better experience for all. I think what you don't want to have, and I know this is like the sales and marketing, there's always like a little bit of a tussle, but marketing creating collateral that is completely out of touch with what the customer actually needs or is actually saying. And because the intelligence community is such a specific customer, getting that insight, getting that context early, working closely with the sales to get spun up on all of the understanding that you need, will only provide, I think, the marketing team, the marketing individual, better context for producing, better output for not just the sales team, but for the entire company.
Absolutely. That context is critical. And it's funny because as a marketer, I feel like sometimes we ask for that context using our vernacular,
Mm-hmm.
but when you have a seat at the table, you can almost just get that context from listening, and not you don't have to go back and ask about buyer personas and all of the crazy things that we talk about in marketing, because the sellers and the P&L leaders for those businesses really already have a lot of that insight. They just don't think of it as being relevant to a marketing discussion usually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think having obviously that buy-in, that executive buy-in, and that buy-in across the sort of go-to-market function broadly of integrating marketing in that way is really important. So it doesn't feel like a forced, why is this person in this meeting? Like they're not, I think having the buy-in and the understanding from everybody that by a marketing person attending this customer engagement or going to this trade show and talking to, potential customers firsthand, it is empowering them to work, more seamlessly with the sales team, make it so the sales team maybe has to finesse and edit less of the things coming their way. And then even to the earlier piece, larger than just the direct support to sales, sort of the company brand building perspective. If I, as a marketer, understand the context and the credibility that we need to build in the larger community, in the larger market, when I'm thinking about thought pieces, when I'm thinking about case studies on the website, when I'm thinking about how to position, a CEO on a podcast, you're doing so in a way that is empowering the company as a whole, the brand as a whole, building up that credibility so that when salesperson is having that conversation, like we talked about earlier, it's a much easier conversation for them, which I think most salespeople would appreciate.
Absolutely. And you can make sure that that company's brand promise is aligned to the mission, the customer mission.
Mm-hmm.
Good. So, earlier we talked a little bit on the topic of like that brand authority and credibility. And so I'm wondering for the CXOs listening, what are some ways that they can empower their marketing team to build trust and differentiate themselves in the market, especially in instances where their work maybe can't be publicly discussed or their clients can't be publicly named?
Mm-hmm. And I think to even the PCI about classified information, I think, being able to tell a story, even like a pretty specific, compelling one, doesn't have to necessarily mean disclosure of classified or even sensitive information. I think giving marketers the awareness of what's happening, be it at the classified level or the unclassified level, as well as then what are those sort of left and right boundaries of what we're able to disclose. And that's actually something that, even working cross-functionally with like your maybe general counsel or your legal team or your contracts team, just understanding, okay, like when we signed on this new customer, was there anything in the agreement about what we can and cannot discuss? Because there's classified information and there's also just things that maybe were agreed upon to not disclose. And in the intelligence community, a lot of that is not disclosed oftentimes, but really focusing on the mission outcomes and kind of introducing, even without specific three-letter agency names, you can say intelligence organization or something like that, yes, it's a little bit less specific than maybe you would want, but it still anchors it in an organization of credibility, but introducing really what the problem was, the solution that you all introduced, and then what the impact on the mission was without getting into operational specifics or even, mission specifics or policy decisions that were made maybe based on certain insights that your tool was able to help glean, but really focusing on what was the problem, solution, and impact that your technology was able to deliver, and developing those case studies that can be published on your own website, floated to media, just spoken about on podcasts in a more public way, and then also, one pagers and other slick sheets that can be developed for sort of direct sending over to a customer is at least how I have gone about it in the past. Because and then there's also the piece of waiting for it to be something that you can't disclose. And while that's not ideal, there have been instances where work that we did in 2019 wasn't disclosed and wasn't publicly available until 2024. And while that may not be like ideal in the sense that in 2020, you really wanted to be able to talk about that 2019 project, it still is a relevant enough capability, mission set, that when it does become something that you can speak about, or maybe the intelligence organization or the customer themselves started to speak about it, and then we're able to use that to kind of, empower our own team to also speak publicly about it, it is still, you have to be creative with how you tell the story so it doesn't feel like super old news. But in that world, even things that were done 5 years ago, from a mission impact perspective, are still really, really compelling stories. And there's still users across the intelligence community who are probably still working those same mission sets today. So taking advantage of those opportunities when they maybe do arise to be a little bit more explicit and specific is also something. It's government, just GovCon in general is a little bit of a long game, and sometimes GovCon marketing is a bit of a long game too. Um, and then I think there's just like the third party and sort of external validation piece, whether it's the customer itself or somebody who's used to be part of that organization and has since moved away, doing a joint public, like a joint thought piece with them, or just having them speak alongside your executive team at a panel, kind of giving that validation, maybe not even an explicit, oh, this company helped us do XYZ, but just in the, by appearing alongside your company or your CEO and kind of talking about the themes and the topics more broadly, that in and of itself can build credibility that is meaningful for a lot of the customers within this community.
Well, that's fantastic. There's so many things I want to talk about from that last response because one is I didn't realize, like I always hear the like, stop, we can't do this for the IC marketing. So it sounds like a traditional case study is really quite possible. And I wasn't aware of that time lag. I hadn't really heard of that before. So I appreciate you bringing that up, that maybe you can't talk about it right away. Maybe it's a matter of national security to not be able to talk about it right away. But when it is available to be publicly discussed, kind of spinning it in a way that makes it fresh and exciting.
Yeah. Well, and actually, and I have a really great example of this, and it even relates to my own background. So when I was at DIA, I was doing a lot of sort of Western Hemisphere, Latin America, and then counter drug stuff. And there was a company back in 2019, and I did not know the name of the company, but they had developed an open source tool that was scraping, basically the entirety of the internet, dark web, and was able to map out illicit fentanyl flows, and purely based on commercially available open source information. I wasn't the data team that was working directly with this, external industry provider, but I was on the team that worked with the data analyst to incorporate those insights into our finished intelligence products. And I, at the time, this was 2019. So this was way before AI was, part of just common vernacular. At this time, it was all like talking about big data and, trying to leverage open source information. But even that was still pretty new at the time. But I remember, incorporating those insights. They were unclassified, so they were shareable across different interagency partners. They were shareable across allies and partners, and like foreign allies and partners. And just overall, it started to open up my eyes as an analyst to how different data sets, maybe that are not classified information, can be leveraged to produce the same timely insights for policymakers. It was then, as I was exploring roles at Rhombus, or just exploring roles generally, but spoke to somebody at Rhombus, that he connected those dots for me, that I was actually Rhombus that had built that tool for DIA back in 2019. And then a lot came out in kind of the 2024 timeframe about this project. It was called Project Sable Spear, and sort of the capabilities that the Rhombus team had built. So it, for me personally, was kind of an aha moment, because as soon as I learned that, and I was like, oh, I want to go work for the company that built those tools that were useful for me as an Intel analyst. But it's still, because network analysis and mapping, be it looking at counter illicit fentanyl, but any other sort of illicit activity, or really any other organization that needs network analysis, network mapping, is still relevant. So those same capabilities, even though it's a 2019 use case, can still be talked about today, but in just the context of sort of what are intelligence community presidential priorities at the moment. But the capabilities themselves are still really relevant. But then even without that, waiting for that time lag, and it obviously is dependent on probably the customer, the mission. Some things are specifically probably time bound, other things are more implicitly time bound. But even case studies themselves that leave out some of those specifics about organizations, or maybe entities that were identified, or whatever it may be, that is those kind of classified details, can still be disclosed in ways that are appropriate, in a more public way, be it case studies, or referencing them at different speaking engagements, things like that.
That is so exciting that you got to work with the outputs of the tool and insights from the tool as an Intel analyst, and then you get to talk about that success years later. when you become the marketing director there. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a very full circle moment.
Before we leave this topic of, you know, being able to figure out how to speak about these past performances, et cetera, are there any strategic approaches like editorial review boards or anything like that that leaders can operationalize to help them make sure that they're walking the line and that marketing and social media isn't putting out anything that could be deemed inappropriate?
Yeah, I think so. It depends. If you have people on staff who come from that world, which a lot of, I feel, companies that are selling to the intelligence community purposefully hire a lot of people, maybe who have exited the community, to kind of provide that sort of quality control, sanity check, and like able to be that sounding board. They're really helpful people to leverage in the organization. But then, if not, full-time employees, whether it's an editorial board or even just an advisory board that comes from that world, not only are they helpful just generally to provide the context of certain customers, different organizations, how to approach different customers, but they can also be those sounding board folks for you to be able to say, hey, we're thinking about writing this thought piece in this journal, or we're trying this social media approach. Like, how do you think this would, based on the fact that you just exited this unit or you just left this organization, how would that be received? So I know, like, a lot of companies, obviously in the space, they have advisory boards of people who came from that, who are former government, former national security professionals, and leveraging them as a resource to understand sort of what are how should we be conducting ourselves in a way that is going to be well received and is also appropriate for this customer base is a great resource to leverage.
That's good to know. And yeah, important, especially for companies who haven't been in this sector a long time and maybe don't have that deep bench of in-house folks who come from that world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Before we leave the, high level strategic discussion for CXOs, you did just mention, the fact that back in 2019, AI was not common vernacular, and now it is. So as we know, AI is kind of entering our day-to-day workflows, and we'll talk about it more in the tactical discussion. But at a high level, what should executives consider when allowing teams to utilize various AI tools in this kind of national security environment?
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of conundrum to consider, because I know there's a lot of some of these companies that work with these communities and work with these customers have been a bit slower because there haven't been great guidelines and great policies written about what you can and cannot put into some of these systems. I think first and foremost, continuing to use a lot of these generative large language models for what anybody sort of off the street is using them for, which is research and synthesizing a lot of information very quickly. So if you're not able to attend a certain trade show, you can quickly pull up all of the key announcements that were made, the different organizations that were there and presented on stage, that had press reporting and everything about it. Being able to sort of synthesize that market research, I think, is still a really, really valuable way to use the tools. It can allow you to sort of brainstorm a little bit, sort of the strategy on maybe the different publications, the different events, the different just opportunities to get in front of these audiences in ways that maybe you're not able to, you don't already know about or you're not already familiar with. And then, at least in my experience, can still use it for drafting early stages of different content that will be going out, especially public ones. Like if it's going to be hitting LinkedIn or the website anyways, it's not going to contain classified or sensitive information, but it can still be very, very helpful in sort of, that drafting and that early structuring phase of how to craft certain content in a way that I think probably marketers across the board are using. Maybe then when it comes to incorporating some of those slightly more sensitive details, you take it out of the model and you just, keep it local to the desktop. But it is still, I think, helpful in a lot of the sort of early researching and content development phases that are used or that marketers are probably using these tools for universally.
Absolutely. That is Fabulous. I'm going to pause here. We're going to go on a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we'll be discussing the same topic of marketing to Intel from the pragmatic practitioner lens. Thanks. Welcome to Branding the Beltway. I'm Stacey Piper, a 25-year government marketing expert and the host of the podcast that helps you level up your B2G marketing game with actionable insider tips and real-world case studies. If you're in the business of doing business with the government, you're in the right place. Each episode delivers straight-to-the-point strategies from senior marketing leaders familiar with navigating the unique world of GovCon. In each episode, we'll first explore that month's topic on a macro level, talking strategy with CXOs. Then we'll deep dive into the same topic on a micro level, examining the practical approach of development and implementation. We're talking brand awareness, content strategy, and the campaign tactics that actually move the needle. Whether you're a CXO, a growth strategist, or marketing practitioner looking to strengthen your federal position, Branding the Beltway is your essential resource for driving results and winning more contracts. Let's connect strategy to execution and position your brand to win. Welcome back to this episode of Branding the Beltway. Reminder, we have with us Kelly Lokshin. She's the Director of Marketing at Rhombus Power, and we're talking about marketing in the shadows, how to build brand authority in the IC. So, Kelly, we had a great conversation for CXOs. A lot of them may have already signed off by now, but hopefully our GovCon marketers are still with us. And so I wanted to have that more tactical discussion of how to actually implement a marketing program directed toward intelligence agencies. So let's go back to that like past performance case study kind of conversation, proof point marketing. Right? How can marketers go about creating compelling content and thought leadership if they can't disclose those, proprietary details, those agency names, or if they have to delay the dissemination of that?
Mm-hmm. And I think, mentioned it a little bit earlier, and I kind of think about it even how you respond to like an interview question, like the star or whatever it is method. But really, even if you can't call organization out by name or can't even just say intelligence organization, you can still introduce the problem, what the approach that your company or your technology took to address the problem and sort of the solution, the outcome. And you're able to do that in a way that while still keeping it maybe high level and not sharing too many details, I think on the outcome piece is actually where you can start to quantify and some things because even if you aren't able to say what you multiplied by X%, you can still use sort of hard hitting data and metrics to show what the impact that your solution was able to provide for this specific customer, in a way that isn't sharing too much about maybe what the actual mission was in the sense of who was conducting it. You can also, at least in my experience, use things that are already publicly available to kind of link yourself to that topic, to that theme, to that dialogue. So, if there's some sort of, congressional document that goes out that's talking about a certain problem area, if there's, acquisition priorities that are released and or, especially I think now with the way that the government is even using social media, there's a lot of things that they're putting out there that is kind of talking about what their priorities are when it comes to incorporating AI or using big data. So leveraging things that potential customers are already putting out there as like, these are our priorities. These are things that we're working on, whether it's a repost or a reframing of that same conversation, but from the lens of your company that's sort of seeing the problem from their perspective, it's able to, kind of implicitly link yourself to that customer, to that problem, to that solution in a way that's a little bit more gentle than writing a case study explicitly about it. Or, for example, like what is maybe happening in the geopolitical context. if there's something happening, in the world at any given time, some strategies that I've adopted is basically leveraging that event as an opportunity to kind of provide a little bit of a thought piece. What is our perspective on this issue, on the way that technology can be incorporated into this issue? Because again, it doesn't say, explicitly, we were working with this organization during this exercise or during this event, but it still gets you and your name and your brand as part of the dialogue, so that when people are thinking about, a specific conflict, a specific incident, you are affiliating yourself with the problem solution and sort of capabilities that are necessary within that domain.
That's great. And I'm so glad to hear that you can, use those like curated articles and content. That's a great point. I think the last time I was doing IC marketing, it wasn't as common to use curated content. And
Mm-hmm.
so I hadn't really experienced that yet now with marketing. Before we
Well,
leave, oh, yeah.
oh, sorry, could I actually just jump in? Because I do think to that point, I mean, in sort of from my perspective, it does seem that a lot of these organizations are kind of realizing more and more that in order to get the kind of technology or capabilities that they need to have that industry engagement. They need to be kind of, a little bit less in the shadows, if you will. So even from my time in government to my time now in private sector, selling to intelligence customers, there's definitely been a bit of a shift in the openness from a lot of these organizations, which does allow not only the companies to be able to maybe produce case studies or other collateral that's a little bit more specific, but it allows for some of that, yeah, just like more open public affiliation to be made. There's different organizational leaders who are going at different industry trade shows and speaking on panels with uh, private industry people, or even referencing different companies as they're talking about capabilities that they're trying to adopt in a way that I don't think was probably as common before, because there was just like it was a lot of just don't say anything. But I think just with the way that the sort of commercial technology landscape has evolved and how many companies now exist to support and provide technology and provide capabilities to those customers, that sort of willingness to be a little bit more open and be a little less in the shadows has been a shift that I think, and I think it's advantageous for companies and for marketers in particular, because it gives them way more ammunition to be able to play with.
That's important to note. I'm glad you interjected that because, I mean, that's a pretty fast shift. That's only like less than 5 years since you've made that shift in your own career where things
Mm-hmm.
have become a little bit more open so that industry can take part in that conversation and government can inform industry what it needs. So I think that's a good reminder, both for the executives, if any of them are still on, and for the marketers, that we need to kind of question why we do things a certain way as marketers, right? Because it could be that we were always told, no, we can't do X, right? Or we can't share X. But it's a good reminder that every year or two, we should be saying, like, hey, like maybe it's time that we can change our stance on this as an
Mm-hmm.
organization. So I'm glad that you brought that up. I was just wondering before we leave this topic, I know we've talked about case studies and events and webinars. I'm wondering if there are any other types of content or messaging that you find particularly effective to build credibility while still staying within those security boundaries. Like, I'm not sure if like demos can be used, and what other types of content, like you were talking about the political environment and regulations, like are op-eds something that you can use in this space? Like, tell me more about the content types.
Yeah, no, great question. And I think both, honestly. So demos, yes. I think being able to, especially like at an industry event or something else where it's like it's a public demo, maybe going to be recorded and uploaded to YouTube or something, being able to kind of tell a story, even if it's not the exact story that maybe your tool, your capability was used for, but being able to kind of demo your capabilities in a way that is within sort of a narrative of a story, that whether it's a real or hypothetical sort of national security use case, is definitely one that can be leveraged. I think sometimes that honestly falls more on the company's comfort in sharing that, be it from a, you know, proprietary sort of information perspective, from a competitor's perspective, from a, even especially in the national security space, like an adversary perspective. Do you want, sort of the adversary, be it nation state or non-nation state actor, whomever it is that maybe these organizations are, you know, up against from the intelligence perspective, do you want them to see their tool? There's definitely, I think, a balance to strike there, but you can do public facing demos as much as your leadership is comfortable with it, because at the end of the day, you can talk about your technology even without the customer mission sort of use case. But have found op-eds and just overall like publications or like press and media coverage to be very, very useful, because especially within reputable sources, be it big publications or maybe more smaller like trade specific ones, those are places that many of these customers trust. They go to for information. They trust the coverage of them, and it comes with a certain level of credibility that having another organization, write about your piece or write about your technology or publish something on your technology, gives that external validation that I think is also really important, for a lot of these customers. So we've done op-eds. We've done actually a few op-eds, because that also has been the added benefit of also kind of positioning your leadership as really a thought leader in the space. And I think right now, people who have that strong executive presence are getting like a lot of attention and have credibility sort of within these national security communities. But it also builds brand recognition just generally, helps with SEO. I think with right now, with the way a lot of even these like large language models pull information, they're pulling from these external sources. So having your company appear in, third party sort of media outlets, journals, other websites like a Reddit, for example, or something like that, is what will also then maybe make your company's content appear in somebody who's searching, what are the best XYZ capabilities in like a chat GPT or a Claude or something like that. So that's like a whole nother sort of strategy, and that's like a whole, I mean, it's not just a, national security specific thing, because everybody uses these models to sometimes do some of their research when they're thinking about new technology. But I think getting into a lot of those external sources is only increasingly becoming more important.
No, that's great. And definitely, I mean, I just shared an article about Reddit and its power in generative search.
Mm-hmm.
So I am on board with that. And this is a good transition, actually, because my next question is going to be if there are specific like channels and tactics that can be more effective for reaching intelligence audiences. For years I've heard, oh, we can't send emails because they're blocked, or we can't use social media because they can't get to it. But I did a little bit of research, and like there's like 18 intelligence agencies that have robust social media presence on LinkedIn and X and Facebook and even Instagram. So
Mm-hmm.
are there specific channels and tactics where you've had more success with your marketing campaigns, or are there ones that you say, oh, this one I avoid because I don't get the most stickiness there, etc.?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, even to kind of the earlier discussion about how times have changed, the fact that all of these organizations have social media presences and are actually they're pretty active, like you said, and they're putting out a lot of content, is an indicator that things have shifted a little bit. And at the end of the day, the people at all these organizations, the buyers at these organizations, are still humans. They're still buyers, and they still consume information in the same way that a lot of people do, even if that means that they're not going and sort of liking a post or whatever. they're still on, many of them are still on LinkedIn, and maybe not checking it as often as like people who are in private sector who are like constantly on it, myself included. But they're still going on there. And if you're able to get your content in front of them, um, whether or not they're engaging with it, it's still building that market awareness and sort of credibility and understanding of who you are in a way that's not as attributable, but still makes an impact. I think the email piece, for example, is a tricky one because a lot of government domains you just can't send emails out the same way that you can. But be it like social media, digital channels, continuing to or social media, less so broader digital channels, building a presence there. But I do think to even the very very first question about relationship building, getting in front of people and that in-person interaction continues to be really really important for this community. So in addition to what you're doing maybe online, leveraging specific industry events, maybe smaller roundtables, different like more intimate workshops or demos that you're hosting, opportunities to really have those more intimate, not necessarily one-on-one, but like small group engagements with those customers and those buyers, is especially important in the intelligence community, I think. But you can't really just do one and not the other. You have to almost have, it's like a full orchestration of how are we creating, how are we creating this market awareness? How are we, creating these opportunities for these touch points, and doing all of that sort of synchronously, is what helps for to keep conversations and to keep sales conversations moving along. So I think it's kind of leveraging a variety of different channels and tactics. Some that are like maybe the more tried and true like social media, and I think for like our specific instance, we have seen actually a fair amount of engagement and really like great value come from LinkedIn and sharing pieces that we have landed in other publications or media outlets also on LinkedIn. But then doing podcasts, doing other things that is, generating content, getting the name out there, and then getting in front of those people in those in-person opportunities and engagements in a way that when it all comes together, it really, really moves the needle.
That's great. And it's not surprising that things might be a little less attributable because a lot of the individual, even though the agencies have a social media presence, the individuals are still pretty in the shadows, like lurking, reading the content, but not necessarily liking it or commenting. So does that mean from a KPI perspective that your leadership is, a little more focused on the like impressions and reach more so than the actual engagement, like comments and likes?
Yeah, actually, and I do think we have seen the the impact, the engagement piece is less of an indicator of overall engagement, I think, or not overall engagement, but overall sort of awareness or what's the
Like
word I'm
the
looking for?
impact. Yeah.
Impact. There we go. There we go. Because especially with like for example, we've done some boosted posts on LinkedIn before that if you were just to look at the comments and likes, it wouldn't have looked like it performed that well. But then when you saw the overall sort of reach that post had, from a even a geographical perspective, but also from a sheer quantity perspective, and you were able to see sort of the click through rate of the different thing that was shared, that far, 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 far outnumbered the engagement itself in a way that was actually kind of an interesting sort of experience for me because I it's much easier to like the metrics that are there and identifiable and sort of public. It's easier to link sort of outcomes to that. But if you can really do the work of linking outcomes to maybe the more hidden metrics that you're able to suss out, it at least drove our strategy to focus less on the okay, what's getting the most likes or reposts, and rather like what is just reaching the broadest audience, and not even necessarily the broadest audience, but the largest audience within the customer set that we wanted to reach. So we were able to see things that went far beyond what it maybe looked like on paper. And then just anecdotally, we were able to kind of confirm with people as we engaged with them that they had seen this article that came out, or they had seen this post about us, even though when I went back and looked, at the engagement, that person didn't like the post itself, because I creep on that quite often. And many of our customers, many of our current customers, and even people that we're engaged with, they're not engaging with the content, but in meetings and things that I'm, been fortunate to be a part of, they have referenced those things in the past.
That's great. So we have to rely on some qualitative feedback in addition to
Mm-hmm.
the quantitative. And it sounds like, marketing to the shadows does mean there's some hidden data success metrics you need to be looking for, and spying for.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a little bit less, I mean, because the intelligence sort of community and just the national security community from like a market size perspective is so small. Like, yes, you want quantity, but it's also about quality. So even if, your like isn't get or your post isn't getting hundreds and hundreds of likes, but in 3 different customer conversations, they referenced, oh yeah, we saw you guys in XYZ, journal, or, on CNN or whatever it was. Like that to me, it's not as flashy of a metric, but it's a more impactful sort of indicator of the marketing strategy working. So it's a little bit of a quality balancing quantity game, when the market size is already kind of small and niche to begin with.
That makes complete sense. Um, so before we wrap up this side of the discussion, I wanted to see if there's like a day in the life. Like, what does effective IC marketing look like day to day within your team? Who's doing what? What are you focused on? How many, programs you have running at once? Those kinds of questions.
Yeah, great question. I know I said it at the very beginning, it's something different every day. We're still a pretty lean team, so I am sort of conducting a lot of this stuff myself still. I obviously work with a lot of teammates across different parts of the organization. We do have like design. We have a fantastic woman who leads sales enablement that helps with a lot of the collateral. So it's, but a lot of actually my kind of day to day, and like at least beginning of the day, where it starts is honestly engaging with BD and sales leaders and folks. I have a pretty good pulse on what engagements are happening, upcoming engagements, upcoming priorities as far as like what are goals for the second half of H2 or second half of H2 of 2026, for example, and like how can we start to plan things for maybe the end of the year that will empower those goals. But a lot of my day to day is just kind of constant communication with those sales leaders and with my leadership actually, because so much of what I'm also doing is in support of my leadership team, some of their executive engagements. It's different meetings that kind of just one give me the context that I need, so that especially in like the afternoon, because being West Coast time, oftentimes mornings are when it's the busiest because that's when DC is still online. But as the day goes on in DC, it becomes later and later in DC is when I out in California can have a lot more quiet time to kind of then put pen to paper and say, okay, well, we talked about this these priorities for the end of this year. Like I'm going to start reaching out to the different organizations that are hosting trade shows. Going to start reaching out to different media organizations about some of these case studies that we developed, maybe start drafting new landing pages for the website. So every day is a little bit different. But I do think that for me, at least, really engaging with the people who are interacting with customers, interacting with potential customers, and then oftentimes just given some of the scope of my role, doing some of that engagement myself, um, is what allows me to then use the sort of quiet focus time to develop content and think of strategy that's going to be the most impactful for those business goals.
That's super. And I think that like being a dot connector in the organization and even with the customer set, like ties back to what you said at the very top of this interview about not putting marketing in a silo.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like a lot of your time beyond the being connector of dots is also really focused on that kind of creating and repurposing and extending the content that's going to build authority and credibility.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think, and one like we Rhombus is an interesting company because we actually didn't really have much of a presence, public presence, for a very, very long time. And when I joined the team is when there started to be a little bit more of a push to do a little bit more public facing content and material. And so there's things even from, you know, whether it's the stories that, or the mission impact that occurred in 2019 and we're now talking about, or even things that, our team maybe had done, like demos we'd given, or podcasts that the team had recorded back before I even joined. Like we've tried to repurpose content as much as possible, and then constantly looking for new content to also generate. So like how can we have more people presenting and getting videos of that and getting sound bites from that, and creating all the little short interesting videos that everyone loves, like that are kind of TikTok style from a lot of these same engagements. So um, I think being able to continue to tell the story over and over again, because even if it feels like, for me sometimes, like, oh my gosh, we've told this same story so many times, it's probably going to be the first time that many of these people are hearing it. Like you have to say something a million times for it to really uh, resonate with the customer, even if it feels like I'm continuing to repurpose the same content or use the same things, so use the same case studies. So trying to come up with new ways to repackage that and is always interesting for internal and external distribution, um, just because there's not as many. We don't have hundreds and hundreds of customers that we're working with like you maybe do in a sort of B2B business. We have like a pretty small set of customers that we've had really great impact on and for. And so being able to sort of squeeze the juice out of all of those stories as much as possible in new and creative and interesting ways, is definitely something that I'm constantly thinking about.
That's fantastic. I love the squeeze the juice concept for that. That's great. So before we wrap, I just wanted to see if there was any final words of wisdom for in-house marketers that are currently marketing to or thinking about marketing to the IC. That could be anything related to AI. I know we talked about AI at a high level earlier, or really anything else. Any tips, tricks, lessons learned?
Yeah, I probably sound like a broken record. And I think because I have the background in this space, something like that, and that I feel has been such an advantage for me. I'm going to continue to harp on this, but really getting that contextual awareness of who are these organizations, what are their missions, even within the organization, what are the different submissions of different centers and different parts of the organization. Not only will it allow you to create better content, better strategy around like how to market to these organizations, but it also, when you then maybe do engage with these folks from these organizations, it gives you that credibility and it allows you to kind of speak their language in a way that is really, really important. I think the intelligence and sort of national security community just generally is a pretty insular one. And so coming in as a marketer that maybe doesn't have that background can be intimidating. So doing the most that you can to, you know, try to understand their missions, try to understand where they're coming from, even before thinking about, well, how do I sell my product to them? But really trying to understand like their perspective on, um, you know, different capabilities, different problems, different sort of geopolitical, even just like dynamics, uh, allows you to be a better marketer. But I also think it allows you to even build those relationships that end up also being beneficial for anybody within any organization who's trying to sell to this community.
I think that's great advice. And again, not just for marketers trying to market to the IC, but all marketers need a better understanding of who the customer who the customer is and what their challenges are. And I also think that especially in B2G and in defense marketing and in IC marketing, it actually helps marketers earn credibility inside their organizations
Mm-hmm.
with those client facing staff that they understand the market. And I think that gives the leadership and stakeholders that they have within the organization more trust to have them sit at the table and have them be part of the go-to-market strategy earlier in the process. So great.
Definitely. I think it positions marketing as like a strategic partner in a way that is, I think very, very valuable, beneficial, and needed. But I think that's a great addition to the credibility within the organization, because it can help anybody within their sort of specific marketing role sort of give their leadership or have their leadership give them and empower them to really be able to own and be a strategic, like, partner in the dialogue of planning to, grow the business.
Perfect. Yeah, great way for them to earn a seat at the table and great for their own career. Excellent. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for sharing your time and your experience and being so generous with your insights. I think the audience will really appreciate what you shared.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stacey. This was a lot of fun. And thank you again for having me on. And hopefully folks find this to be an interesting conversation.
Perfect. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Branding the Beltway. If you're looking for an outsourced marketing partner or fractional marketing leadership who truly gets the GovCon sector, Piper Strategies is the team to know. We're not just here to deliver, we're here to empower. For resources or to inquire, visit piperstrategies.com.